and welcome to Macros with Mythili, the ET Now show that takes a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues and developments in India and overseas. This week we're going to look at a sector that can make or mar India's economy, the oil sector. Last week, Prime Minister Narendra Modi met with chiefs of oil and gas majors, both global as well as domestic, as part of the government's efforts to promote energy security and attract investments to the oil sector. This is the second such meeting, and the idea behind such high-level meetings really seems to be to reduce India's import dependence by 10% over the next 7 years and create a gas-based economy, a target that was set by the PM in March 2015. How feasible is this plan, given that over 80% of our oil requirements are currently met through imports, which also means that what happens in the global oil market has a critical bearing on our fortunes? And who better to discuss the complexities of the emerging scenario than Vandana Hari, founder and CEO of the Singapore-based oil markets research and analysis company, Vanda Insights, and Narendra Taneja, national convener of the BJP Energy Cell. Welcome to the show, Narendra, Vandana. Let me start by asking both of you, what is your assessment? How realistic is it really to expect that India will be able to reduce its dependence on imports by as much as 10% in less than a decade? Given that in absolute terms, this actually translates into a huge amount now that India has become the third largest consumer after US and China. Let me start with you, Vandana, because you have the outside perspective.
Hi, Mythili. Thank you for having me on this show. It's great to be back. A very important question that you have raised, one that's not only true for India, but a lot of other consuming countries in Asia, especially since pretty much all of them are seeing significant growth in oil demand, or let's call it energy demand. You know, it's across electricity, natural gas, petrochemicals, and so on. To my mind, the argument is not so much as to will this target be reached by a certain year? You know, will India be able to convert to electric vehicles by 2030? I think what we lose in that process, if we argue that way, the pros and cons and the possibility, is that there is a momentous shift happening, definitely in India and other countries, you know, China and other countries of Asia. Can India reduce its dependence on oil? Well, first of all, should it try to reduce its dependence on oil? Absolutely. You know, as a signatory to the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015, that's the way to go, because the country wants to and needs to reduce its carbon emissions. Now, as you just mentioned in your introduction, natural gas is a great way to go. Electric vehicles, then you have other renewables. In the power sector is not such a big consumer of oil, but nonetheless, you have renewables. You have other technological advancements which are producing more fuel efficiency, you know, across the industrial sector down to the consumer, you know, cars and so on. So I believe it has to be a multi-pronged approach. I believe the end game has to be clearly in view, and we shouldn't get lost in whether it can be done by a certain timeline or not. I think infrastructure, addressing the what needs to be done on that front, is going to be a huge part of the equation. But as long as the intention is there, I think we can acknowledge what needs to be done and start moving in that direction.
Narendra, would you agree with Vandana? In fact, newspaper reports speak of oil majors assuring the government of investments of over 1 trillion in the next 5 years, if a conducive policy environment is created. Rosneft, for instance, has committed to increase its investment 5 times in India's refining sector. Saudi Aramco said it will increase its investment by 300 billion over the next 3-4 years. Are these just empty promises? Or what do they want when they talk of a conducive environment? What do they mean by that, Narendra?
Well, I think basically what they are looking at India primarily as a market. I mean, market where they can sell their oil and they can sell their natural gas. Now, Indian government has to be kind of look at it from a completely different perspective. You know, on the one hand, yes, India is probably among the fastest growing oil markets in the world, and even natural gas market for that matter. But at the same time, we need these companies, including ExxonMobils of the world, BPs of the world, Rosneft of the world. We want them to come and invest in oil and gas infrastructure, starting for exploration and production, to gas pipelines, to LNG terminals, to retail distribution, and so on and so forth. import. So that's what precisely what we want. I mean, their agenda is basically different from ours in the sense, and the whole idea of the exercise that you saw recently, the last 48 hours in New Delhi, was this, to bring about a kind of balancing so that they look at India the same way as we try to do. At the same time, we appreciate what they are looking for as far as Indian market is concerned, because we need them. There is absolutely no doubt about it. But when you look at it in absolute terms, demand is only going to grow and imports are only going to grow. Imports right now, for instance, our dependence is in the region of about 80 to 82%. But when you look at the demand for oil in India by 2040, OPEC says 10 million barrels a day. That's going to be our requirement. If that is really true, and to me it looks like very close to what I think, because which means that, you know, we need more investment, exploration, production in both offshore and onshore in India, and at the same time we need to invest more in oil assets overseas, including in Africa, Latin America, Russia, wherever we get such opportunities. So I think it's a lot going on. You can understand India is the only large economy in the world which is so dependent on imports for oil and gas, particularly oil. So that makes us a little bit vulnerable in terms of energy security. And at the same time, our dependence on the Middle East is very high, which we all know is politically extremely volatile, is not going to change, the picture is not going to change anytime soon there. So that India has to prepare accordingly. And we also find domestic, you know, especially when it comes to offshore, we need foreign technology, we need foreign practices, we need foreign techniques and players also, so that we can basically bring out whatever is there in our deep water in the Bay of Bengal and the Arabian Sea. So it's an extremely complex landscape. But one thing is very clear, and that seems to be the government view also, that you know, India will continue to need oil. Oil will remain central to India's economy for at least 40 years. And natural gas will actually is emerging now as an important player and will become a very, very important player and will remain so for next 60 to 70 years. And so which means that we need more oil, we need more natural gas. As far as electricity is concerned, let's not forget, when the electricity is a product, we need fuel to generate electricity. Oil, coal, natural gas, uranium, or solar, and so on. So, and we need more electricity. We have already declared by 2030, we want to have actually EVs in majority of metro cities across the country. If that's the kind of agenda we're pursuing, in other words, it means we need more coal, we need more oil, we need more gas, and at the same time we need more uranium in order to expand our nuclear power, program. Just to conclude, one line I want to say, and that's, you see, look at natural gas in particular, which is a huge focus for us. That 800 million Indians are still out of natural gas economy. 800 million, and that's the direction we are going for. Natural gas, make India a gas-based economy. So, you know, I'll share further views as we...
Okay, certainly. So India's dependence on oil will not come down in the near future, certainly. But Vandana, given that, and given that commodity prices have begun to move up over the past 1 or 2 years, will oil prices also follow suit? Because we have seen oil prices edge close to $60 a barrel. But there are contradictory reports that even as commodity prices rise, oil prices may not rise so much. And that has a huge impact for India's future, given our dependence on oil. Vandana?
I think it's important to keep the sliding and the subsequent rising in oil prices in context for our viewers. When we talk about a lot of the talk, the headlines in the oil sector tends to focus on the day-to-day movements in oil, and clearly those are important. However, you know, for the sake of our discussion here, I think it's important to bear in mind that at $56, $55 benchmark crude prices today, we are less than half of the peak that we saw just a few years ago in 2014 when prices started sliding. And as far as the view is concerned, of course it's evolved over the past few years, but the consensus now broadly in the global oil industry is that prices are likely to remain pretty much range bound. If you're talking about benchmark crude prices in the 50 to 60 range, there are very few analysts, very few people elsewhere in the oil industry calling for or expecting prices to go substantially higher. And that has led to a major reset button that a lot of the oil and gas producing companies have had to hit on, basically to get ready to call a lot of the oil and gas that was in the deep water, in the frontier, just call it stranded resources, maybe that will never be produced. And at the same time, you talk to oil companies from, super majors, ExxonMobil, Shell, down to, Italian Eni. We were talking with them a couple of weeks ago in Singapore at a major oil conference. And everybody is singing from the same hymn sheet. They're all looking to drive down their costs. So, they are, in fact, the name of the game now is to boast of lower and lower economic, their break-even price for oil production. And that tells you basically that's the way the winds are blowing. Oil prices are expected to remain low for the foreseeable future until probably they get taken over by renewables and electric vehicles and what have you.
Okay, but Narendra, do you agree with Vandana that oil prices are likely to remain low? Or do you believe, as I do, that in a world where you have two huge unknowns, Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, trying to predict oil prices is a bit of a mug's game? Narendra?
Well, I don't agree with Vandana, because you see, look at oil. It's not only demand and supply. I mean, look at Middle East, for instance. Middle East, politically, economically, very, very volatile. We don't know what's going to happen in Saudi Arabia tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen over Iran and in Iran tomorrow. Iraq at the same time remains very volatile. The entire region. Look at Venezuela, what's happening in Venezuela. I mean, oil industry there has gone for a 6 practically. Brazil is also quite politically unstable, and economically they are facing major challenges. Russia, we all know, Russia looks stable because Mr. Putin is there. We don't know what happens there tomorrow. I mean, things might implode internally. So when you look at the total picture, all these countries, I mean, geopolitics is still a major factor when it comes to the oil scenario of future. At the same time, economies like India, China are going to grow. Today, for instance, our oil bill looks very fatty because we are just $2.3 trillion economy. But 10 years from now, we will be hopefully $7 trillion economy. And then even if our oil bill is $500 billion, we will actually be able to absorb it quite conveniently. And the same may go for China and hopefully Russia and Brazil. So, which means that, at the same time, economic parameters are changing very rapidly as economies like India and China and Indonesia, they grow further. So in that context, if you look at it, my view is that, for instance, if in order to make sure that oil, Middle East is stable and we have to pay a price of, let's say, $70 per barrel, I think India and China won't mind it. It's okay. It's in a way you are subsidizing peace and stability in the Middle East. That's how I look at oil. It's not just just not demand and supply. Second point, what is important is at the same time, you see, as for instance, dependence on oil, it may look like it's actually going up, but in absolute numbers, it's only going to go up. We just saw OECD countries, last 3 months, if you see the data, demand for oil in OECD countries has gone up, which means that if you are a developed economy, that does not necessarily means that you are not going to consume more oil. So total picture, renewable is fine. Renewable is going to kind of going to play a very, very important role. But when you look at the global energy mix, role of renewables, even by 2040, is going to be rather small, not more than 30% as a whole, as more 2 billion people also graduate into kind of energy haves across the world. And the population in India and many other countries also grow at the same time. When you put together all these facts into picture, my own assessment is oil prices will probably in the region of $60 to $100 per barrel in time to come, and that's where they will probably stay for a long time to come. But I think 4 years down the line, we should be preparing that oil prices in the region between 60 to 80 and then $60 to $100 per barrel over slightly longer period of time. But that should be okay for India's economy if we continue to grow.
Okay, so Vandana feels that oil prices are likely to remain low. Narendra feels no, geopolitics plays such an important role in the case of the oil market, if at all it's going to rise given the increased demand globally. But on that note, it's time for us to slip into a very short break. Please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and I'm in discussion with Vandana Hari and Narendra Taneja about the future of the oil economy in India. How important is oil going to be? Why are we so worried about getting new investments into India? But now let me turn to you, Vandana, and ask you a question that is very important in the oil sector. There seems to be a new kind of bonhomie between the OPEC and the non-OPEC producers, as evidenced by the visit of the Saudi king to Moscow. Or is it that like all unlikely and unnatural relationships, call it what you will, it's not likely to last, and when prices fall beyond a certain level, it will become a case of each country for itself? Vandana?
Look, if you look at OPEC's history, and throughout that history, there have been occasions when they have partnered with or collaborated with non-OPEC producers. There was one time when China had joined that effort as well to reduce production. But generally speaking, if you across those efforts, the non-OPEC cooperation was quite lackluster. Not to mention that OPEC itself found it very hard to ensure compliance. So this time, a couple of things have really surprised the market. One is, as you mentioned quite rightly, the tightness in the collaboration between OPEC and non-OPEC. And the other has also been reasonably and remarkably high compliance adherence by OPEC members to the cuts that they have pledged. I believe, while skepticism about how long it will continue is healthy, I believe certain things have changed in terms of relationships, especially if you look at Saudi Arabia and Russia. And that is, of course, the king's visit last week to Moscow cemented a lot and gave the world a clearer picture of how much these two countries are getting tied together at the hip, not just on OPEC and non-OPEC, but overall their political ties. I mean, we know, it's beyond the scope of this program, but we know that Russia is getting more and more closely involved in the politics, geopolitics of the Middle East, right? So things have changed. It's hard to compare it exactly to the previous occasions. My personal view, again, here is that this camaraderie, this close cooperation, understanding between Russia and Saudi Arabia is likely to continue. There's a lot of give and take happening outside oil, behind the scenes sometimes, that we don't see. But I have a reasonable degree of confidence, shall we say, that this will remain a close cooperation right through 2018 at least.
Narendra, I'm sure you have a view on that, but given the limitations of time, let me ask you something that's of more interest to the domestic audience. What is keeping petroleum out of the GST, and when do you think we'll be able to get it in? We've already seen state governments reduce the VAT. So is that a happy augury of when we can get petroleum into the GST? Narendra?
Very quickly on Russia. You see, Russia and OPEC, they've been collaborating for a long time now. To some extent, even Norway has been collaborating with OPEC. And that's probably is going to continue. But OPEC is growing actually weak. And a weak OPEC is not a bad news for big consumers like India. Coming back to GST, I think, look, this is going to be a long haul. Because when you look at the economies of, some of our states like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Bengal, Orissa, even Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan for that matter, they are so heavily dependent on oil revenues. And it's also a very, convenient way of collecting revenues, because these revenues are collected by state-owned companies, Indian Oil, HPCL and BPCL, and passed on practically on a silver platter to these states, so they don't face any kind of hassle in terms of collection. So that's number one. Number two is, at the same time, the kind of infrastructure you need for all that is going to take long time. So I think this will probably be discussed in the next GST Council meeting in Guwahati on the 9th of November. But when it comes to building up the kind of consensus which is required, which has become a convention in GST Council, my own assessment is going to take a very, very long time, maybe a year, maybe 2 years. But in the meantime, some of these more states may cut down VAT on petroleum products before Diwali, including Madhya Pradesh is likely to do it, and some other states might follow the suit. But as far as bringing petroleum product under GST, my own assessment is probably not going to happen before the next general elections.
Well, yes, it is going to be difficult. But Vandana, let me shift to another question, which I'd like to ask both of you. What do you think is going to be the future of oil, given that all over the world, and including in India, there's a shift to electric vehicles? What will that mean for the demand for fossil fuels?
So I agree with, as Narendra mentioned earlier in the segment, absolute demand for oil for the foreseeable future. And when I say foreseeable future, let's talk about next 10 to 15 years. I think the pace of change has accelerated as well, so it's really difficult to talk in longer terms. But yes, in absolute terms, oil demand is growing. It's growing in Asia. It's where the demand is coming from. I think that's a point of great debate within oil companies and elsewhere in the oil and gas sector. Is it going to be from transportation? Is it going to be from industrial demand? I mean, clearly, probably not. Is it going to be from petrochemicals? And increasingly, when I talk to people in the industry at conferences, there again seems to be a consensus that the driver of oil demand growth is going to be more and more the petrochemicals industry. Your packaging, all your goods that you use, with increasing urbanization, better standards of living in this part of the world, especially. So in terms of oil's future, that's what I see. That yes, I think the pace of growth is going to definitely come down. It will grow. It's not at the red hot rates that we have seen in the past 10 years, should we say. I think oil is increasingly going to be replaced by gas. Now, it's going to be a slow transition, no doubt about it, because of infrastructure constraints, not just in terms of distribution. I mean, let's look at gas replacing diesel and gasoline. That's not very easy right now. It may replace LPG and some other household use, but not transportation. Jet fuel demand is another one where nobody's working on any alternatives. So some of these areas will remain, but gas subject to infrastructure will grow. And as I mentioned earlier, I think the trend towards greater energy efficiency, energy conservation as well in more developed parts of Asia, it's already happening. Renewables, electric vehicles, I think all of that is the future of energy.
Narendra, would you agree with Vandana that despite the shift to electrical vehicles, the fact that the global economy is recovering and the fact that there's going to be newer areas of demand for oil means that oil demand will never really come down? In fact, the International Energy Agency predicts a 1.6 million barrels a day, year-on-year jump. Or is that just wishful thinking from the IEA?
No, demand for oil is only going to grow. Demand for natural gas is going to grow. When you look at, for instance, the numbers on how energy transition is going to take shape in countries like India, I mean, energy transition will continue, but at the same time, the next 60 years, when it comes to fossil fuels, oil in particular, is only going to grow. I mean, you just look at projections for India and China, India in particular. EVs, we are all talking about EVs, but electricity, you need fuel to produce electricity. I mean, where is that electricity is going to come from? In India, for instance, when it comes to oil, we are using oil not only for transportation, we are using oil to generate electricity. There is a captive, generation of electricity in India using diesel. That's there's about 80,000 megawatt. 80,000 megawatt electricity is produced by using diesel in the country, across the country. Not in a very organized way, but that's what the reality is. And at the same time, petrochemicals is another area which is actually fast emerging as a very, very important area in terms of its dependence on oil. So looking at the picture in totality and also keeping the role of natural gas in mind, my assessment is that we need more oil, we need more natural gas, and we need more of oil and natural gas in order to generate electricity. If we're going to reduce our dependence on coal, which seems to be the case, that seems to be the direction government is following, but which means we will need more natural gas. And natural gas, again, our dependence on import is only going to grow. From the Middle East, from Australia, from Africa, from Latin America, even from Arctic countries like Norway. We have already imported 2 parcels from the Arctic Norway. So that's going to be the picture. And that's what I said. It all depends on how smoothly we go for the energy transition. And India is going to be probably the last country in the world to stop using oil.
Okay, we're going to be the last country in the world to stop using oil. But we're running out of time. So Vandana, let me just give you the last word on something that has become very important in India. What to your mind is the significance of India ordering its first crude cargo from the US? How much will it help us get lower prices, which is of course the most important thing? And will diversification of the source basket give us more bargaining power, especially vis-a-vis the Middle East producers? Vandana?
It's good news, without any doubt, no ifs and buts there, I think, on several fronts. So first of all, if you look at prices, if you compare WTI, which is the US crude benchmark, and with Dubai, the sour crude benchmark, WTI has been increasingly being discounted, so it's cheaper. Now, it absolutely makes sense for refiners anywhere in the world, and definitely more in India, to buy the cheapest crude available. Okay, so buying, welcome to the club. A lot of Asian countries, China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, have already been on that bandwagon. They've used it as an opportunistic crude. Nothing wrong with that word. Just buy the cheapest crude that you can get. Indian refiners for several years have been a little bit hobbled by having the bulk of their requirements locked up in long-term contracts. I think another message to the refiners is to try and free up more and more of their crude purchases to be bought on a spot market basis, which allows them to buy the cheapest crude. On the diversification front as well, great news, right? We talked about the geopolitical problems in Middle East, Africa, which have been the traditional big suppliers for India. More crude from the Americas can only be good news.
So clearly there is some good news as well, but I'm afraid we've run out of time completely, so it's time for us to wrap up this edition. Thank you so much, Narendra and Vandana, for joining me in this discussion and telling us what the future of global oil is going to be and how India can best address the issue of its dependence on oil. Thank you also for watching. Remember, we'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. Till then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at ET Now. If you have any other issues that you'd like to see discussed in this forum, please do write into us at the email ID you see at the bottom of your screen.